What's up everybody? I hope you're doing real well. Today I want to talk about the tone match feature in the Axe-Fx 3, something which I think is a little bit misunderstood. Now, the Axe-Fx has over 200 models of popular amplifiers, and these are component by component digital recreations of real world amps. They sound fantastic, but you might want to know how to go through and either choose an appropriate amp model to match your real world amp that you're familiar with, or how to use the tone match feature to actually replicate the sound of a particular amp and cabinet that you've got set up. This is obviously really handy if you're recording with real amps and you want to be able to take the sound of your amp in the studio and recreate it in your Axe-Fx Live. So we're going to have a look at 3 different ways you can do that, starting by just comparing a real world amp to an amp model, and then we're going to have a look at some strategies to use the tone match block and how you would go about setting that up to capture the sound of your amp in the Axe-Fx 3. Let's get straight into it. Before we blaze away, let's look at what a typical tone match preset might look like. We're in Axe Edit, looking at the grid. My guitar's coming to input 1, and it's being split 2 ways. The dry sound is going to the front end of my amp, and there is another signal which is going to the amp and the cab. Now, the reference source here is going to be the live amp and cab. In this case, it's going into input 2 of my Axe-Fx 3. So when I smack a tone match block in there, I need to make sure I go down to config and set the reference source to be input 2. If you're not using input 2, if you're using input 3 or 4, or you're tone matching a live recording, you can select any of these accordingly. And in the case when you're replacing the cab with the tone match block, which we'll look at a little later, you don't need a cab in there, so you can just go ahead and shunt that. Furthermore, if you are tone matching an amp and a load box, you would need some kind of cab IR in there, in which case I would put the cab at the end of the chain, in which case, say I wanted to go into config and reference the amp. You know, an amp and a load box with no cab sim sounds pretty terrible, so we would want to hear the output going through some kind of cab sim. So that's going to cover everything that we're going to do in this video. To start out, we're going to hear this Marshall JTM45 reissue with a Marshall TV cab. I've used a Shure SM7B to mic the amp up, and a clone of a classic Neve preamp. This is what it sounds like straight up with no post-processing. Pretty classic sounding amp. So what I want to do first is I'm going to capture an IR of that speaker, mic, and mic pre-combo, and then we're going to compare the Axe-Fx JTM45 model with that IR to the real amp, the real cab, and the real microphone. First, let's capture the IR. Once we've captured a tone we like with the amp, I've connected my Matrix solid-state power amp to the output of the Axe-Fx, and I'm going to capture an IR of the cabinet, mic, and mic pre-setup. We can do this from the front panel if you hit setup and then navigate down to IR capture. All you have to make sure of is that you've got the correct outputs and inputs. As you can see here, for the mic only method, you want your mic preamp coming into input 2 left, and I'm sending out of output 2 left. So what we're going to do is simply capture this IR. You'll know you've done it right when you see the graphical display looking something like this. You can then navigate over and you can select the user slot that you want to save this to. So I'm just going to go to a convenient user slot, this one number 110, I'm going to select. I'll go back and I'll hit save. Now that I've got that, I've set the amp model to the exact same settings on the knobs. One thing that I really like about the Axe-Fx is that the knobs pretty much follow the same behavior as the real amp. I have set up a toggle switch on my FC controller, which is at my feet, which will let me go back and forth between the real amp and then the model. Let's hear it. I'm not going to look at my feet. I'm just going to stomp on this toggle a bunch of times, so I'll press it to randomize it. I don't know what scene I'm on now, but let's hear it. That is certainly close enough for rock and roll. Playing there and playing some raunchy stuff like that, I can't really hear a difference. The hardest thing was just volume matching everything. Once you've got it volume matched, the amp model sounds pretty much spot on with the amp, which when you consider it, A lot of people go on and on about how no two amps sound the same, and that often comes down to like tolerances between different components or pot tapers and things like that. So the fact that the Axe-Fx model sounds so close to my real amp is pretty fantastic, I think. Now, if that's not quite close enough for you, we can go in and do a tone match. There's two ways to do a tone match. You can either replace the cab block with a tone match block, or since we've already captured an IR of this speaker setup, I can go in and do like a little corrective tone match. So the tone match is going to be after the cab block here, and it's essentially going to bring the amp in line with it's going to bring the amp model in line with the real amp. Or is it the other way around? I don't really know anymore. But anyway, let's do that. What I'm going to do, I've got a tone match block set up in Axe Edit, and then I am basically going to hit the start on all of this. I'm going to play a bit of guitar, and then I'll hit match, and then we'll have a listen to it back and forth. So now I've done this tone match, I can do the same thing I did before and just flick back and forth between the sound of the amp and then the amp IR and the little tone match addition in there. That's how you could do a corrective tone match there. The other example, say you haven't shot an IR of your cab mic and mic pre-setup, we can replace the cab block in the Axe-Fx 3 with the tone match block. So let's go and do that. Running the same comparison from the real amp to the new tone match. So as you can hear there, both methods are pretty satisfying. Personally, I like being able to capture the IR of the speaker cab because it gives me the flexibility to use it with any amp model I like. Whereas if I'm tied to a tone match, like in the latter stage that we did there, where we replaced the cab block, then that tone match is really going to only work with that particular amp. There is another way to match an amplifier model to a real amp that will let you use it with any cab IR, and that is by using a load box. So I'm going to get my Fractal X Load out, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace the speaker cab mic and mic pre with the load box. So it'll be amp to load box to Axe-Fx, and this will let us create what I call an amp match that we can use with any speaker IR. So to really showcase this amp match feature, I'm using an amp that isn't modeled in the Axe-Fx 3. This is my Marshall DSL-50. This is what it sounds like running through the Fractal X Load and into a speaker IR. So it's a great sounding rock amp. The amp model in the Axe-Fx 3 that I found that sounds closest to this particular amp is actually a Friedman model. Have a listen. It feels very similar under the fingers. So what I'm going to do is, between the amp model and the cabinet block, I'm going to put a tone match block. And what we're going to do is use the amp and the load box as the reference point for the tone match. So in this case, I'm going to basically be able to create a model of my Marshall DSL-50 in my Axe-Fx 3. Let's do that. Now I can go back and forth between the amp and the model with the tone match. So this gives me the flexibility of being able to run that with any virtual speaker cab that I like, which I think is fantastic. So hopefully this has given you a good rundown of the different ways you can use tone matching. You can either not use tone matching at all, and you can just capture a IR of your cab mic and mic preamp and use that with any amp model that you like. The amp models are super accurate. If you really want to match your amp though, you can either bring up an existing model and an IR and do a tone match in the two ways that we demonstrated there, or you can use a load box and you can match just the head and the load box to an existing amp model and use it with any speaker IR. So I spent a lot of time talking in this. What I'm going to do is give you guys an example of this Brit JTM 45 in a mix, and I'll also do something with this tone matched Marshall DSL. We can also use a similar process to the very first example we did where we had the JTM 45 with a cab. This time I'm going to use my old Revision G rectifier and the X-Load and compare it to the amp model with the same settings through the same IR. And that's the thing that really sold me on the Axe-Fx 3. I used this amp to record the last Ragdoll album on basically every guitar track, and when we came to track guitars for the new material we're recording, we set the amp up and we tracked some stuff with it, and then we tried this amp model in there, and side by side I actually ended up preferring the sounds that I was getting out of the Axe-Fx 3. So go figure, but that's a little bit beside the point. This video is more about how you can go about tone matching and how accurate the Axe-Fx 3 is. I hope that through all these examples you've been able to follow them. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments section. Until next time, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you around.